We're going to take a look at what was one of the most booming economies in Europe. During the good times, Ireland was a popular base for big businesses who were seeking low taxes in a thriving European economy. Then the financial crisis hit. What is the Irish government doing to fix things? We're joined now.
In 2008, the worldwide financial crisis and crash of the housing market left Ireland in a state of disarray. With unemployment, homelessness, and financial instability all on the rise, Ireland was in a crisis. How could the people of Ireland ever trust the government again? 2008 served as an impetus for change. Out of this crisis arose the Citizens' Assembly.
I just think we were lucky in the tragedy of our recession that the politicians were receptive to trying this out, and then they could see that actually it does work.
We were part of a group of political scientists basically who started looking at what were the kind of underlying factors that hit Ireland worse, and then one of the outcomes of it was the first kind of deliberative assemblies and so on.
We sort of started working together with a few other political scientists from around 2010, starting to push an agenda for political reform and a particular focus on citizens' assemblies.
Established in 2016, the concept of the Citizens' Assembly was created to bring together a group of citizens to deliberate on a variety of political and legal issues and their solutions. Typically, it is made up of 99 randomly selected citizens who spend months becoming educated on a pressing policy issue. Since 2022, any adult member in the state of Ireland is eligible to become a member of a Citizens' Assembly. The final goal of the Assembly is to make recommendations to the Irish Parliament.
Initially, the reaction was outstanding. You know, we really could not have believed, I think, in our wildest dreams that Ireland would be the first country in the world, literally the first country in the world, to vote for gay marriage in a public plebiscite, in a public referendum, and the first country in the world to have had two major constitutional changes and policy outcomes, gay marriage and abortion, coming from citizens' assemblies. So it was beyond certainly my wildest dreams. I never would have expected the kind of proposals that we were pushing way back in 2010, 2011 to result in these sort of things.
Votes in favour of the proposal, 1,201,000.
Ireland made national headlines for its first two citizens' assemblies on abortion and same-sex marriage, which brought unexpected and unprecedented social change to the country.
Don't you know they're talking about a referendum, Sam?
It's been a day of huge emotion, especially for women. A day history recorded massive, gradual social change. A younger, more liberal generation has seized the agenda, rejecting some of Ireland's older and more conservative values. And this now is their future.
The Citizens' Assemblies, particularly on stuff like abortion, were when we got to address things that we did not talk about for decades, to the detriment of many people, with issues we swept under the rug, and they were the start of us actually acknowledging things that were happening to everyone around us.
Ireland's government has conceded defeat in the nation's referendums on modernising its constitution. The campaign had sparked debate over the meaning of family and the role of women in the home.
The government accepts the result and will respect it fully. As head of government and on behalf of the government, we accept responsibility for the result.
In June 2021, Ireland hosted a Citizens' Assembly on gender equality to address the language in Articles 41 and 41.2 of the Constitution regarding family and women in the home. The Citizens' Assembly produced recommendations for changing the wording.
It just wasn't put out very well. They kind of half-assed a referendum, to be honest. Instead of fully changing the Constitution, they just wanted to change the wording of it. It felt like they were just trying to please a few people, instead of just putting their neck out a bit and fully changing the referendum so that women have a better stance in it.
Yeah. So it was really hard to know how to vote in that referendum, and I felt even if I voted one way or the other, it wouldn't really matter. So I was I was there. I've never had that before. Actually, I was there in the booth going, I could vote yes or I could vote no on this, and it just wouldn't mean anything. I don't even care.
But this language that citizens found so confusing didn't come from the Citizens' Assembly at all.
Like on one hand, you can kind of look and say, these are things that the Citizen Assembly recommended, and there was a 2/3 vote against them. On the other hand, one of them wasn't exactly what was recommended, and there was the communication around the whole thing wasn't given due process, that parliamentarians weren't given the focus. So it wasn't just the Citizen Assembly that wasn't treated well by the politicians, it was actually the entire political process.
There was actually really good wording for a referendum, and then they didn't use it, and then they did this real kind of meaningless, and this is sort of, I suppose if you were to think about our government, they always do the most they try to do something in the most ineffective and meaningless way because they don't really want to stand for anything.
Yes, what you had was the sort of process that we've written up as good practice process go on. There was the Citizens' Assembly produced a very well considered detailed report with a load of recommendations. That went to an all-party parliamentary committee, an Oireachtas committee, chaired by a very respected, the leader of the Labour Party, Ivana Bacik. It produced an extremely well-considered response statement, engaging respectfully with the Citizens' Assembly. And then the thing just sort of sat there in abeyance for ages, for years, well certainly for many, many, many months, until suddenly Leo Varadkar, I'm going to be unfair now, sort of said, hey, International Women's Day is coming. Let's go ahead and have these referendums. We need to move quickly, so we're going to push the vote for the referendum through the Parliament in the form of a guillotine. And the disaster that followed was that of those two referendums, they were both heavily defeated. One was defeated by the largest margin in the history of all our referendums since the start of the current system of 1937. So there was a deep embarrassment, and Leo Varadkar quits a few days later, not necessarily just because of that, but perhaps that was the final nail in the coffin.
Leo Varadkar was the Prime Minister of Ireland until March 2024, when he resigned 2 weeks after the referendums were defeated at the polls.
We did depart from their recommendations. So some people would say the reason why they were defeated is we weren't radical enough, and we departed too far from the recommendations of the Assembly.
See, because a lot of people voted no on those because they were kind of very flawed, and the reason they were flawed is because the government kind of did a half measure for what the Citizens' Assembly wanted and did stuff that wouldn't have actually helped anyone.
The Citizens' Assemblies didn't, they're not constitutional lawyers, so they didn't recommend a legal wording, nor were they asked to, nor were they competent to. That they were asked to produce a general set of principles. And what they recommended, which I still agree with, by the way, is that our constitution should recognise that not all families are based on marriage, and also that when it came to the whole issue around care, that it wasn't just about the care provided by women in the home. Care is much broader than that. But trying to turn that into constitutional law is actually quite complicated.
How much governments are not necessarily following through with the recommendations, that's a cause for some disappointment. So I've become a sort of friendly critic of the Irish processes in recent years. And that speaks volumes, at least to me, of the extent to which the Irish government are not treating the deliberative process with the respect that it's due.
But what respect is due? After all, citizens' assemblies are non-binding opinions produced as mere suggestions for politicians.
And we are always clear that the citizens' assemblies make recommendations. They don't make decisions. And those recommendations then get examined by elected politicians before the government then decides whether or not to go ahead with them. So they have an advisory role. I think it's quite useful.
Each citizens' assembly is funded by over €1 million of government money, which supports transportation costs, food, and lodging for participants. Perhaps more than the financial cost, however, is the time. Participants spend hundreds of hours deliberating, listening to lengthy presentations by experts, and producing reports with the number of recommendations climbing towards triple digits. With this large investment of time, energy, and resources, the Irish government has an obligation to the Citizens' Assembly and its people. Not to blindly obey the produced recommendations, but at least to listen.
Not saying that giving respect means you have to agree with it. It just means you have to engage respectfully with it, and where you disagree, you have to set out the reasons why. You don't just ignore it.
the Irish Citizens' Assembly has brought monumental changes to the country, establishing Ireland as a beacon for democracy around the world. In a time of turbulence all those years ago, the Citizens' Assembly created a powerful connection between the government and the Irish people. But now, if this process is to stick around, it needs to grow with its people.
Do you feel like the government accurately represents the Irish population?
No, I don't at all.
If we could imagine a future where Irish politicians really truly embraced deliberative mini-publics in the way that I certainly would love them to embrace it, and they follow this Ostbelgian example, you could have this body that is asking citizens to sign petitions, for example, or carrying out survey work of citizens, or through some other means trying to get a sense of what are the burning issues that the citizens of this state would like to have discussed by Citizens' Assembly, and then going ahead and starting that Citizens' Assembly with what I was saying earlier on, the understanding that at the other end, it doesn't mean the Citizens' Assembly is driving an agenda, but it's certainly engaging in a debate that the politicians have to engage with respectfully.
I would trust pretty much that most people in the government are good people. Like, I think Irish politics isn't very good for that. There's kind of a level of personal trust. I don't know if I'd trust them a lot on specific issues.
Most importantly, the government must fulfill the obligation it made nearly a decade ago when the first Citizens' Assembly began.
There's sort of an endearing naivety built into the deliberative mini-public model, and it has to grow up now. Because it's got away with an awful lot. Sort of, oh, isn't this wonderful? You've taken 100 citizens together. Aren't they doing a great job? And coming forward with all these recommendations, and sure, we'll accept a few of them, but hopefully they just forget the fact that we've ignored most of them. And I think now there has to be a grown-up politics about the whole thing.
If the people are to continue trusting their government, they need to believe that they are being heard, valued, and respected. When the people speak, the government must listen.